It's one less thing for you to worry about. So what I'm going to do now is add a timer that will then fire a method that randomly updates the value so it appears that there's some data arriving on this sensor. In order to do that though, what I really should do is add another method in here which I'll call replace. Now a replace method changes the entire state. So I've got a copy of this that I've written earlier. I'll just have to paste this in here. So we now have a replace operation. The replace operation accepts as input a service state, which has to be the same type as the service state for this particular service, and then it can send back either a default replace response, which basically says yes, everything's okay, or it can send back a fault to indicate that there was a problem. Now it's very unlikely you're going to have a problem on a replace, but it is possible, and all services have this sort of pattern where they take an input and they send back either a success or a failure in the form of a fault. So I've added a new operation that will allow me to insert information into the service state. Now you might be wondering, why do I need to do that? Because I can just poke a value directly into the service state. The reason is that replace is what we refer to as an exclusive operation. If you had multiple items in your service state and multiple different operations that could be updating it, you can't afford to have two operations running simultaneously and potentially creating conflicts in the service state. So any operations that need to write to the service state must be exclusive. In other words, only one can run at a time. Robotics Developer Studio is designed to do multitasking, multi-threading, and so in theory there can be lots of these handlers all running simultaneously. Right, so now what we need is to add the service handler for the replace operation. Otherwise it won't do anything. So I'll grab a copy of that as well, and we'll put that over here. So here's a service handler. It's a replace handler, and what it says is I'm receiving a replace message. In the replace message, the body of the message is actually the service state. So I'm going to stuff that into the state that I created at the top of the service. I'll then send a notification to any of my subscribers. So anyone who was subscribed will automatically get a message saying, hey, the state of this service has changed. And I send back a response to the person who sent the replace message saying, yes, that was successful. And basically that's it. That's the end of the handler. Okay, so that's how I handle replacements. What I want to do now is add some code so that a timer will fire every so often and update the service state. For that, I need to add some code for the handler itself. So I'll put that just here after the start method. So it's called fire timer. It takes one parameter, which is a date and time that I won't actually use, and then it's going to send a replace message. Notice here I'm posting a replace message to the main port, in other words the operations port for this service. And then the last thing I do is I activate a receiver using the timeout port with a timeout of 5,000 milliseconds, which is 5 seconds. When that timeout fires, it's going to call fire timer again. So you can see this thing actually calls itself back every 5 seconds, and every 5 seconds it creates a new message to the service saying replace the current state of the service, using just this random number that I'm putting into the sensor value. I've got to kick this off though. Otherwise, there's no way for this loop with the timer to actually start. So I need to add one more little piece into the start method, which will allow it to get going. And for that, it's very similar to the code at the bottom of the method. I just do an activate up here. It says, okay, I want a receiver and I want to use 250 milliseconds this time, and that will kick off the fire timer. So what happens with this service now when it's run is start will execute automatically. It will activate a timer. The timer fires, executes the fire timer method here. Fire timer calls itself back, and now we have a continuous loop every 5 seconds changing the current state of the service. So let's run it and see what happens. Okay, the service is now running. I bring back my web browser, refresh, have a look at the service, and it's got a value. And now you'll notice it's not 0 anymore, it's actually some weird number. And if I refresh, there's a different number. If I refresh several times quickly, you can see the date and timestamp changing, but the sensor value doesn't change, which verifies that in fact the sensor value is only changing about every 5 seconds. And pretty much that's it as far as this service is concerned. What we've got now is a service that simulates a sensor, gives random values every 5 seconds. People can subscribe to it by sending a subscribe message and saying notify me when it changes, or alternatively they can use the get operation to say explicitly I want to know the value right now, which is called polling, where you say get a value, sometime later get a value, sometime later get a value. It's your choice how fast you want to poll. Of course, in this case there's not much point in polling faster than 5 seconds because nothing's going to change. So that's all I really wanted to show for creating a new service using C#.